Hey folks, it's Miss Sinclair for AP World History Modern. Today we are continuing on with our Unit 1 lectures. Today we are going to be learning about Islam and the Islamic Caliphates. So if you are one of my students, you need a daily cover page. So what religions have we learned about already, and what do these religions believe? We've already learned about quite a few. So think back, what religions have we already learned about, and what do those religions believe? Today, we are starting on topic 1.2. Remember, these topic numbers align with the AP course description, and this topic is on Islam and the Caliphate. So, the topic in the course description is labeled as Developments in Dar al-Islam from 1200 to 1450. And today we are looking at the objectives, explain how systems of belief and their practices affected society from the period circa 1200 to 1450, and explain the causes and effects of the rise of Islamic states over time. Right. So, Islam and the Caliphate, let's jump into it. Obviously, our story will start before 1200. So what do you already know about the Abrahamic religions? And how would Arabs, this ethnic group who live on the Arabian Peninsula, how would they have known about these other religions? Take a moment to respond. So, let's start with some geography. The Arabian Peninsula. The Arabian Peninsula is this vast swath of land here between the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf. It is going to be surrounded at the south by the Gulf of Aden. So when you hear us talking about the city of Aden, it's right here on the edge of Yemen, the Gulf of Oman, and then the Arabian Sea. It is incredibly dry and inhospitable, although the coastal regions can and do have lots of agriculture, extensive agriculture. Okay. It's also located in a place where you will see lots of trade, right? You have the Indian Ocean Maritime System. You have India. This was where our Fertile Crescent was. So like Mesopotamian city-states were up here. Persia, the Greeks. We have ancient Egypt, right? So this is an area that is a crossroads for a lot of trade and ideas to spread. So where are we at the start of this unit, or at the start of this lecture? Well, you have the Sassanid Empire, which is what was Persia. So after Alexander the Great sort of conquered Persia and then died, you have the rise of the Sassanids, and then you have the Byzantines, which is what's left of the Roman Empire. So the Sassanids and the Byzantines are always fighting each other, right? They are fighting over this land. So this territory here, we would really refer to as a frontier, not a border, because no one fully controls it, and it's going to pass from control back and forth. Now, the Sassanids will be Zoroastrian predominantly, and the Byzantines, of course, are Christian. So you have the diffusion of these religions as well, especially when you consider the larger Jewish population around Jerusalem and the Jewish diaspora located throughout this entire region. So, let's talk about the Arabian Peninsula prior to Muhammad's arrival. Well, you see that there are going to be nomadic groups and farming groups. The nomadic groups are known as the Bedouin, so Bedouin cultures. And we are going to see that they are going to be sort of our first civilization in the Arabian Peninsula. So Bedouins are organized into clans, which are kin-related, and then tribes. So a clan is like your family, extended family, cousins, aunts, uncles, grandma, grandpa, and then a tribe would be multiple clans together. These Bedouins would provide camels and safe passage and act as a guide for merchants who are looking to get their goods from perhaps the port inland to Jerusalem, Antioch, or across this landmass altogether to access the Mediterranean Sea. So these were caravan traders for the most part. And the leaders would be known as a sheikh. So clan cohesion and war over pasture lands would cause inter-clan rivalry. So transcontinental trading is very common, right? These are not like isolated peoples. Wealthy merchants were the elite of this region. So Mecca here, where's my mouse? Located here, close to the coast, right? Mecca is going to be an incredibly important trade city, right? It is also going to serve as a religious center for the Kaaba. So the Kaaba is going to be a center of polytheistic worship. So it's this religious center in which you have multiple gods associated with it. So let's say you're a merchant and you've traveled somewhere from afar and you want to worship your god and you don't know these local gods. Well, you go to the Kaaba and there would probably be a shrine for your god. It would be a shrine for multiple gods, local and from afar. And so Mecca served as a pilgrimage site even before Muhammad received his revelations. And Mecca is going to be controlled by the Quraysh tribe. So we see that these tribes were often, in fact, matriarchal because the men in the family would often be the traders, right? So they'd be the ones traveling. So the people holding down fort would be the women. Bedouin religion consisted of animism and polytheism, but they would have been very familiar with Christianity and Judaism. The Kaaba holds a sacred rock known as the Black Stone. The desert peoples would consider it to hold a jinn or a spirit, but it also held idols to other gods, like I said. Some people would associate this with Abrahamic religions too. The idea is that Abraham, right, God's chosen, according to Christian and Jewish tradition, Abraham built the Kaaba because this was where God had asked Abraham to kill Ishmael, according to Muslim tradition. Jews and Christians do not believe that the Kaaba holds any religious significance. So let's talk about Muhammad. Muhammad is most significantly known for being the prophet and the founder of Islam. And then shortly after, he starts sharing the revelations given to him from the angel Gabriel by God. The revelations are from God. Gabriel is the transmission. So Muhammad will then go on to form a political kingdom as well. So he is orphaned at a young age, raised by his uncle, becomes a merchant when he marries a wealthy businesswoman and widow. So Khadijah is his first wife. She's older than he is. She is educated, widely traveled. She's wealthier. Her social standing is more than his. So she is of the Quraysh tribe, and he gets access to this really wealthy and dominant tribe, which dominated Mecca. Khadijah is going to be his only wife during her lifetime, and they have daughters together, but no sons. One day, in 610, he goes out into the desert for meditation, right? This was not an uncommon thing. Part of Bedouin beliefs was animism, so that meant there were spirits in the desert and the rocks and the wind. So he goes out into the desert to meditate, and the angel Gabriel appears to Muhammad and says, proclaim in the name of your Lord who has created, blah, blah, blah. I have a message for you from God. This is known as the Night of Power and Excellence in Islam. And he is going to go home and be like, Khadijah, I'm pretty sure I'm going insane. I'm going crazy. And she's like, what's up? And he's like, I just had a revelation. An angel appeared to me in the desert and said that I was God's chosen messenger to communicate his will to man. And Khadijah's like, maybe you're crazy, maybe it's heat stroke, or maybe it was actually the angel of Gabriel. So see if it happens again. Go back out into the desert. And it does, and it happens again and again until he is eventually convinced that he's not going crazy, that in fact he is receiving revelations from God. So for the next 3 years, he only tells of these revelations to close family and friends. But the revelations will continue until his death. So these revelations will later be written down in Arabic, and they are called the Quran. He calls people to worship the one true God, and that at the end of time, their souls will be judged. Your sins will be judged against your good deeds. The blameless will go on to paradise. The sinful will taste hellfire. And so a Muslim is simply someone who submits to God. So Islam means submission. Followers of Islam are Muslims, right? Ones who submit to God. And the core of his message is there's only one true God. Muhammad is his final prophet. And you need to change how you're living your life, because one day a judgment is coming and you will be judged. Islam builds off some Jewish and Christian scriptures, but believes that both groups have been negligent in taking care of the word of God. Right? So they've been misinterpreted. The fact that Christianity, Christian Bible, which is still being compiled kind of at this time, but the fact it has multiple authors is a reason to doubt its authenticity. So Islam, let me tell you a little bit about it. The idea of Islam is that Muhammad is one of many prophets, right? So Islam recognizes the history of Christianity and Judaism, right? Abraham was a prophet. Moses was a prophet. Even Jesus was a prophet, not the Son of God, certainly not God himself, but was a prophet of God. And Muhammad is the most up-to-date edition, basically. Muhammad has received the most up-to-date version of God's will for man. Islam is going to transcend tribes, clan, and class divisions, which is really astonishing because this is a very clan-oriented culture. You didn't really cross these boundaries, and yet Islam will unite people. It is not only going to be a religion, but also a military and political system as well. It will create a strong sense of community. It will help end many feuds between tribes and build a community based on religion. So Islam creates an ethical code as well as a legal and moral code. So people will now be held accountable for their actions. And the 5 core beliefs of Islam are sometimes called the 5 pillars of Islam. And they are as follows. You are expected to fast during Ramadan, which commemorates Muhammad's first revelation. You are to confess faith. This is the Shahada. There is no God but God, and Muhammad is his final prophet. You are to go on the Hajj. This is a word for you to know. If you don't know the word Hajj, make sure to write it down in your notes. This is a really important term. The Hajj is a pilgrimage. A pilgrimage is a religious journey. So at one point in your life, you are expected to go on the Hajj to Mecca to worship at the Kaaba. So the Kaaba is going to be redeemed as a holy place for Islam, no longer a place for polytheistic worship. And the expectation is if you have the means, both financially and physically, to go on the Hajj, you should. I have a good friend who is a airplane mechanic, and he travels all over the world working on jet engines. And one time, he was flying to the Middle East, and he was on what's known as a Hajj flight. So these are flights that are designed specifically to take you to Mecca, which is where he was headed as well to work on an airplane. And they are filled with people, faithful Muslims, who perhaps have never been on an airplane before. So he said that you hear stories of people who start like fires, to heat up lunch, or don't realize that there's bathrooms, and so like they pee on the wall of the airplane. Right? These are people who take their faith so seriously that they have saved up, that or they have found a charity, because there are charities that exist to fly poor people from Muslim countries to Mecca. So these are people who have who take their faith so seriously that they are flying across the world on an airplane, which they've never been on an airplane before. They've never been out of the country before, just so they can go and fulfill their faith's duties. There's zakat. This is charity. So Muslims are expected to care for the poor, to care for the widow and the orphan, and they're expected to pray facing Mecca 5 times a day. So Muhammad is established as the last prophet of our Abrahamic religions. They're called Abrahamic religions because you can sort of trace them all back to Abraham, right? So Abraham was the guy who left Ur and was like walking through the desert, and God appeared to him and was like, Abram, I'm renaming you Abraham. Your children are going to outnumber the stars, and he's considered the father of Judaism, right? Then out of Judaism will come Christianity. And each preceding, faith tradition views themselves as the end, like they don't recognize the updated version. So Jews do not believe that Jesus Christ is the Messiah. Christians do not believe that Muhammad is the final prophet. And Muslims recognize there's some validity back there, but Christians and Jews have it wrong. They don't have the updated version like we do. So let me continue on with our notes. I just got to figure out where my thing is. All right. Sorry, I have too many screens up. Okay, so the Ummah is the community of all Muslims, not to be confused with the ulama, which are the scholars, Muslim scholars. So pretty quickly, we see the formation of a Muslim state. So Muhammad begins to tell his message, share the revelations from God with other people in Mecca. And these followers start to gain attention, and the elite, the leaders of Mecca, get pretty annoyed because, right, Mecca is a pilgrimage site. People travel from all over to visit this particular pilgrimage site, to visit the Kaaba. So to have a guy standing on the street corner and being like, all y'all who are here to worship a polytheistic God, you're going to hell, right? You're wrong. There's only one true God. Submit. Like, that's bad for business. So they run him out of town. He is viewed as a threat. So he goes to Medina, which is a much more agricultural community, and begins to share his revelations from God and gets more and more followers. Eventually, he begins a war with Mecca, and it becomes clear that Muhammad, as well as being a prophet, is an effective political and military organizer. So in 629, he goes back to Mecca, conquers the city, and reclaims the Kaaba as a Muslim shrine. He destroys all the idols except for the black stone. And then he dies in 632 without naming a successor to his new small kingdom. So I do really recommend you watch this crash course on Islam. It's a really good one. You don't have to watch all of it. Watch up to the document, the secret document, or whatever he calls it. And then beyond that's pretty optional. So I would like you to identify the core beliefs of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and then compare and contrast the 3 religions. Come up with at least 6 similarities or differences total. Okay? So look over your notes for the Jewish, Christian, and Muslim beliefs, and then what you are going to type as an answer are going to be the similarities and differences. Okay, so the big question now, of course, is who's in charge, right? If Muhammad is dead, who is in charge? Well, this is going to lead to the formation of the Caliphate. So the Caliphate is going to be the office established after Muhammad to rule his empire. So there is some debate over who should succeed him. Your options are Abu Bakr, who's going to be his father-in-law, after his beloved wife Khadijah dies. Muhammad remarries, and at this point he becomes polygamous and has multiple wives. Abu Bakr is one of his oldest friends and also happens to be the father of his favorite new wife, Aisha. Or option 2 is Ali. Ali is going to be Muhammad's son-in-law. Remember, Muhammad doesn't have any sons. But Ali's pretty young, and Abu Bakr is a respected leader in the community, not to mention that he has known Muhammad longer. So they decide that Abu Bakr should be the first caliph, the first leader of the political state, right? So let's be clear that after Muhammad, there's no other religious leaders on the same scale as Muhammad, right? He is the final prophet. But before his death, he created a political state, and someone needs to run that side of things. That's what the caliph does. He's viewed as like the protector of the faith. So Abu Bakr is going to continue and confirm Muhammad's practices. He is going to organize the writing of the Quran, which is a collection of Muhammad's teachings. And then you have the hadiths. The hadiths are stories and sayings of the prophets. So it is around this time you have the formation of the ulama. The ulama are Muslim religious scholars. Over time, Muslim societies will form Sharia law based on the Quran and the hadiths. So this is the first Umayyad Empire, Umayyad Caliphate. It is the first hereditary dynasty of the Muslim caliphs. So you have a split early on, right? You have the Sunnis who had supported Abu Bakr, and then you have the Shia, who are the people who thought that Ali should have been the leader after Muhammad's death. The Sunnis will make up about 85% of the Muslim population. And over time, the Shia will really create their own practices and govern their own territory as well. So you can, if you visit Damascus, you can see some Umayyad, an Umayyad mosque. It's beautiful. I love it. But the Umayyad Caliphate is not our only one to know about. So here is our modern distribution of Sunni and Shia. Basically, most people in the world are Sunni, except for a few people in Yemen, a few people in Afghanistan, and most people in Iran and Azerbaijan. So when you think Shia, most people think Iran. So let's talk a little bit about the rise and fall of the caliphate. This is that mosque I was talking about, the Umayyad Mosque in Damascus. I've been there. It's so gorgeous. So the capital of the Umayyad Caliphate is really going to be in Damascus. And they are going to expand rapidly. So the Umayyads conquer many different regions during this time period and unite areas through expansion. So they set up a large bureaucracy to administer the different empires' needs. We are going to see that the Umayyad Caliphate will first conquer Syria, Egypt, and the Sassanid Empire, right? We talked about the Sassanids. Then Tunisia, North Africa. In Spain, they'll eventually set up the Cordoban Caliphate. And the same time that they're conquering Spain, they're conquering Iraq. Then they expand, even reaching India and the Anatolian Peninsula. Sub-Saharan Africa will be introduced to Islam through trade, primarily. And it was the nature of sort of Arab society that allowed for this massive expansion, right? It's a very flexible culture and social hierarchy. So it tied army service to residence in military camps. People would live in garrison towns. So the army would always be ready, but the countryside would be peaceful. we see that people could convert to Islam, but there was little incentives because converts were viewed as inferior to people who had been born into the faith. So we see few Muslim converts during the Umayyad period. People of the book, Christians and Jews, were treated better, but had to pay taxes. So we see as pretty much a constant throughout the caliphates is that if you're a non-Muslim, you have significant economic disadvantages. You had to pay higher taxes. There are certain economic avenues that were not open for you, and plus there was the general social discrimination. But Christians and Jews were viewed as people of the book and had to pay slightly less taxes. So Muslim Arabs, right? So ethnically Arab, religiously Muslim, were first-class citizens. They would pay the lowest taxes. They could join the imperial administration or army. They could receive riches from conquest. Over time, the Umayyad Caliphate is going to decline. It is going to focus too much on luxury and riches. This is a common theme you're going to see throughout world history. You have this great empire, but once its leadership stops being focused on expansion and governing and starts being focused on pleasure, right? They have sort of conquered what they want to conquer, and now they can just reap the riches of what they have created. They stop being so effective. So their legitimacy is going to be really questioned by many Arab Muslims because they have abandoned the frugal, simple lifestyle of Muhammad. People are going to resent them and view the Umayyads as corrupt and decadent. And non-Arab Muslims will really resent the Arab social domination. So we see eventually the fall of the Umayyad Caliphate and the rise of the Abbasid Caliphate. So the Abbasids are going to rule from 750 to 1258. They are going to rule from the city of Baghdad in Iraq. They will eventually be conquered by the Mongols. The Abbasids really begin as Shia, but quickly convert to Sunni. One of the reasons why they moved the capital to Baghdad is an attempt to distance themselves from the Umayyads. They will present themselves as very pious and religious, right? Theology and religious law are a big part of the court. The Abbasid caliphs order a biography of Muhammad to be written. And so under the Abbasid Caliphate, we see that converts are viewed as equal to naturally born Muslims. Unlike the Umayyads, they realize that this is key for expanding and stabilizing their rule. As people convert, we see the city of Baghdad become more and more cosmopolitan. And yet they still continue with the Umayyad tradition of excess and luxury. You have the emergence of a harem. This tradition really begins with the Abbasids. So a harem is a household of wives and concubines. They will become more and more like the Sassanid Shah. So remember, prior to Persia being conquered by the Muslims, this had been the Sassanid Empire. So they're speaking Persian. Their leaders were called the Shah. And so we see over time the Abbasids become more and more Persian in culture and sort of move further and further away from Arab culture. Different ethnic groups, right? So as the Abbasid caliphs become more distracted over time, the role of the vizier is going to increase. So the vizier, the chief administrator, will start to take on more and more power and responsibility. So like in the movie Aladdin, right, Jafar was the vizier. And this is often not a good sign when the power starts to move out of the royal family. And yet we see that the Abbasid Caliphate is known as a golden age. It's a period of intellectual achievement and growth. They have the great works of Greek, Persian, and Indian philosophers, religion, poetry. They collect it all in Baghdad and translate it into multiple languages. So a lot of the reasons why we have the works of Plato and Socrates today is because of the Abbasid Caliphate collecting it and preserving it. So like Aristotle is during this time period that the story Arabian Nights are written. You see Greek, Persian, Central Asian, and African cultural currents all sort of start to center in Baghdad. So during this time period, the most cosmopolitan intellectual city in the world is Baghdad. This is the place to be if you want to write, if you want to think, if you want to do anything that's culturally or intellectually significant. You go to Baghdad. So, it is called a golden age because of the refined and cosmopolitan culture in Baghdad. So this is a really short video. It's, I think, less than 5 minutes. I would suggest you watch it. It's called The Rise and Fall of Islam's Golden Age. All right. So Abbasids are happening like over in Baghdad, right? Let's talk about what's happening with the rest of this territory that the Umayyads had conquered, though. So you see some fragmentation. The empire grows really quickly, and the Abbasids aren't really able to effectively control it. So, for example, in Spain, in Cordoba, you have a breakaway. So they're no longer under the control of the Abbasids. It's the Al-Andalus is sort of this Islamic Spain, the Cordoban Caliphate. So ethnically, we see Moors, Berbers, and Arabs all living here. So the Moors are same as Arabs, but same as Berbers, but Moors are the people who had moved into the Iberian Peninsula. We see that in the Cordoban Caliphate, a really distinctive blend of Roman, Germanic, Jewish, Arabic, and Berber tradition. So it's much more European. So you see a uniquely Spanish-Arabic style emerges in art, vocabulary, and architecture. So think about, like, if you speak Spanish or learning Spanish, you might know the phrase like, ojalá. Ojalá que blah, blah, blah. I hope that blah, blah, blah. Well, it comes from the phrase inshallah in Arabic. Inshallah means God willing. We see that the Muslims are going to remain a significant force in Spain until, basically like Ferdinand and Isabella. So like 15th century. However, they are going to have sort of their unique culture, and you can really still see this Arabic influence on Spanish architecture and the Spanish language itself. So like if you've ever been, these are images from the Cordoban Caliphate, the Cordoban Mosque. So if you go to the city of Cordoba, you should have to go to the mosque. It's so gorgeous and beautiful. I've been there. It's also really random because in the middle of it, you have this really ugly Baroque cathedral, right? So when the Christians reconquered, they were like, we must make this Muslim place of worship Christian. Let's just like gut the middle of it and put a really ugly cathedral in it. It's very random, but very beautiful. The Moorish part, not the Baroque part. Okay, then over in Africa, and you see the Mamluks, which were originally Turkish military slaves in the Abbasid army, will eventually say, like, we don't want to be slaves in your army anymore, and take over Egypt and form their own state. So then you have, like, the Mamluk state. So in Ghana, you are going to have our first sort of majority Muslim sub-Saharan African kingdom. It's going to be in West Africa. You can see the mosque that was built there. It's made out of mud, so every year they have to take mud when it rains and rebuild the sides of it, right, because of erosion. You see the emergence of like the Fatimid dynasty. There's lots of other dynasties emerging in the region. But the Abbasids are still happening, and they're still the most dominant. But now they're not the only power on the block. In Iran, you have the Samanid dynasty, the Fatimid dynasty in Egypt. And then you have the Seljuks. So the Seljuk Turks are nomadic Turks, so from sort of Central Asia. That's where we consider most nomadic Turks coming from. They will end up conquering Baghdad in 1055. But they allow the Abbasid Caliphate to remain as a religious leader only, and the Seljuks will rule politically. The Seljuks will really unite a fractured political scene in the Eastern Islamic world and will play a really key role in the First and Second Crusades. So, the Seljuks have a highly Persian culture. They will play an important role in the development of a Turco-Persian tradition, even exporting Persian culture to the Anatolian Peninsula. In India, you have the Delhi Sultanate, which is a centralized Indian empire created by Muslim invaders. It will trigger the development of centralized political authority in India. So the Delhi Sultanate will extend protection to conquered peoples, but when they arrive, they are going to be very intolerant of Hindus and destroy Hindu temples. We will talk about the Delhi Sultanate a little bit more later. The Abbasids and the Seljuks are really going to fall when the Mongols show up. Oh, here it is. Lots of great architecture from the Delhi Sultanate in India. Very beautiful. I'm a big fan. I'm just a big fan of Arabic and Muslim architecture in general. All right. The Sultanate in India is going to be highly efficient, but is really going to suffer from internal struggles, eventually falling under the pressure from rival states and invaders. And then the Mongols show up in 1258 and conquer everybody. So, how did the Islamic Empire incorporate new peoples? And what was the expansion's impact on trade and communication? What do you think? We haven't talked about it explicitly, but what do you think? All right, let's talk a little bit about Islamic civilization. So you have Sharia law. This is a legal system that emerges out of the Hadiths in the Quran. It will slowly start... It is formed over time, right? It's not like someone shows up and is like, here's this book, this legal system I wrote. It's just tradition over time that becomes enshrined in law, and we call it the Sharia law. To convert to Islam, you had to spend time with Muslims, you had to learn Arabic, right? Because the Quran is only holy in Arabic. You had to learn the practices, and yet, many people did choose to convert. There were certain economic and political advantages to being Muslim. Not to mention, all these Muslims saying that we're going to be judged someday. It's kind of scary. So, maybe we got to get on the right side with God. We see the rapid growth of cities like Baghdad, Mosul, Aleppo, which was gorgeous. It was destroyed in the Civil War. I loved it, though. Baghdad, Damascus, and during this time period, we see Christian cities like Jerusalem, Antioch, and Alexandria will shrink. Mosques will serve as both the ritual center for faith, as well as places of learning and social activities. So during this time period, in general, we see a commercial boom. The Abbasids will use dhows. You see them, this is a type of ship, with triangular sails to carry goods for trade. Muslims will participate heavily in the Indian Ocean trade system and will eventually become the dominant traders. So we often see that Muslims would, on ships, cruise on Muslim ships would actually include Jews and Christians, because each group had different holy day. So it would allow you, it's the Sabbath, I can't work. It's okay. There's people of the other faiths on the ship to pick up the slack. So you never had to stop doing business, but you could still honor your faith. You see widespread use of metal coinage, agriculturally, citrus, rice, sugar, cotton, and wide irrigation systems. Women and Islam. So women didn't really travel far-flung. We see that women, if they left the home, would be veiled, but I want to be clear, this is not something that is going to be new. This was already a practice by the Byzantines and the Sassanids. It was just a local cultural practice for the region that women would veil themselves when they left the home. Women would be highly influential within the family but hold no public roles. Islam limited you to 4 wives, but you could have as many concubines as you wanted. In general, Muslim women had it better than Christian or Jewish women because Islam guaranteed daughters at least some inheritance, and women would control their own private property. If they were divorced, they could remarry. And men could initiate a divorce for any reason with a woman, but women had to have specific ones before they could divorce. Women could practice birth control, so they could they could say no to their husbands when it came to sex. Women could testify in court. They could go on pilgrimage to Mecca. Slavery was also common in the region, but you were not allowed to have, you were not supposed to have slaves of other Muslims, Jews, or Christians. And yet, it was still allowed and practiced widespread. So over time, as Islam is spreading and changing and different religious traditions and cultural norms are being incorporated into it, people start getting worried. Religious leaders, the ulama, start getting concerned. Like, shoot, we are losing the core of Islam. So they're going to establish madrasas. These are religious schools. And you start to see the emergence of a third sort of Muslim sect, the Sufis, who are going to focus more on sort of a mystical version of Islam, focusing on poetry and ritual. As far as Islamic culture goes, to finish up, we see architecture is going to be really focused on mosques with minarets. We see that there's a lot of emphasis on calligraphy, so in Muslim art, you do not depict figures, right? They don't want to create an idol. So this is the Alhambra. This is an example of Moorish architecture. It also happens to be my favorite castle in the world. It's in Spain. If you get a chance to go to Granada, I recommend you visit the Alhambra. It's gorgeous. There's also a board game named after it. Also, chess came from the Muslims. But I may have cheated on the board game, but I can neither confirm nor deny. Accusations were made, but I mean, I didn't win in the end, so could I have really cheated? This is the Great Mosque of Cordoba. Like I said, gorgeous, and they built a random Baroque cathedral smack dab in the middle. Learn about it more if you take art history. All right, let's finish up with just a few practice questions. So, why is Abbasid rule considered a golden age? Now, a source-based question. So, this is an excerpt from the Quran. So, it's a long source, so you probably need to pause the video to read it. This word is you. Sorry, it's kind of cut off by my picture. All right. Aha. So, take a moment to read it, and I'm going to move on to the next actual question that goes along with this source. So, the view of women presented in the excerpt is a continuation of which of the following? So based off your understanding of the source and your knowledge of Islam and continuity and change, the view of women presented in the excerpt is a continuation of which of the following? Which of the following does the document reveal about the status of women? Right, so here's some of that higher level thinking you have to think about and understand. What is it revealing? It's not explicitly saying. And which of the following religions had views on women similar to that expressed in the Quran during this time period? All right, so for your summary, please explain how systems of belief and their practices affected society in the period from 1200 to 1450. Then explain the causes and effects of the rise of Islamic states over time. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. Thanks for listening.